Now, how do you eliminate this enormous administrative cost? By requiring insurance companies to provide reasonably standard policies, not 72 products. I hate that word, products. 3 options: an HMO, a PPO, and an indemnity plan. That's it. All with the same contract language, the same definitions, and all that kind of stuff, and the same codes. Then you can require states to create, or require states to require insurers to create a single clearinghouse, payment facility, right? Because it's easy that way. And so docs and hospitals can send their bills to one place every month and get reimbursed. But you can't do it now with this cockamamie system. So if we were to do that, and I hope my state is going to show the way on the cost control side and the elimination of these overhead costs, then I think we'll finally have achieved, in an interesting and kind of uniquely American way, this goal of making sure that all Americans, and especially working Americans and their families, have decent, affordable health care. Now, I don't know how you feel about this. If you disagree, feel free. Some of you will say, well, why don't we just have a single-payer system, universal Medicare? I'd kind of like that. I don't think it's politically possible at this point. What about the Nixon plan? I thought that was pretty good. That's the model I used for my own bill as governor. But that's having problems. So it seems to me what Congress has done, probably in the current political environment, is the most accessible and the most viable approach. It isn't ideal, but it goes a long way toward finally making sure that most of our fellow citizens and those who are here legally and legitimately, especially working Americans and their families, have the security of knowing that if they get sick, they can be able to have a primary doctor, get care in the most cost-efficient way, because having a primary doctor and going to that primary doctor is the best way to keep costs down as opposed to this emergency room stuff. And we can move on to other things. Lots of other issues out there. What I think is going to happen in South Carolina beats the hell out of me. I don't know. This has been one crazy primary. But this is going to be a tough year for the president. Anytime the economy is down, whoever the incumbent is, presidents or governors for that matter, are in trouble. So it's going to be an interesting year. I think personally Obama can win it. I think he's going to, but this is not going to be a walk in the park. But I think we have serious questions that should be raised. And by the way, isn't it interesting that the only person running for office right now who's raising them is Ron Paul, about our national security policy and how much we can afford, and whether or not a Cold War national security policy is a little obsolete these days. I mean, do we really need 837 American military bases all over the world? How about 437? I mean, what is this stuff? This paranoia about China, I don't understand it, folks. I mean, everything we buy from China. Everything we borrow from China. So what's the threat? We're sending 2,500 Marines to Australia. For what? Great duty for the Marines. It's a great place. They got great looking women. They love Yanks. I mean, I'd love to have that assignment. Carrier groups in the China Sea. We still can't get out of this. We got to have an enemy stuff. And I'm not naive. There is a threat out there. It's terrorism. But you don't fight terrorism with F-35s and ABMs and all this stuff. Terrorism requires tough, professional, international police work. You got to get inside these organizations and break them up. But that doesn't require a $900 billion defense budget. And it's interesting, the folks that say that government doesn't create jobs are the first people to say, don't take that base out of my district. Right? Isn't it strange? Don't stop financing those carriers. Don't stop building planes. Of course government creates jobs. And some of them are essential. But $900 billion worth of defense spending in what, interestingly enough, is the most peaceful world Kitty and I have ever lived in, strange as it may sound. It really is, And in my view, it's not that there aren't threats out there. I'm concerned about Iran. I'm concerned about North Korea. You are. All of us are. But I think it's interesting that the libertarian in the race is the guy that's suggesting to us that it's time to do some rethinking about our defense policy. Anyway, enough for me. Questions, comments, thoughts, reactions, and, here we go.
If you're Ahmadinejad, easy to say, of Iran, and Israel has nuclear weapons, and the United States has nuclear weapons, and all of these countries have nuclear weapons, do you not have a responsibility to the people of Iran to try and develop a nuclear weapon?
No, I think you've got a responsibility, George. We all have a responsibility to try to denuclearize the world. That's what I think our responsibility is. And in point of fact, not that we're moving as rapidly on this as we should, but we and what we used to call the Soviet Union have, in point of fact, been attempting to really dramatically reduce the number of warheads. Remember at the peak of the Cold War, how many warheads we had? 15,000. How many did they have? 15,000. 50 of them would destroy the planet. It was crazy. MAD we called it, right? Mutually assured destruction. And it was mad. It's crazy. So I don't think it's too much to ask Iran, or for that matter North Korea, to be parties to the international agreement, which in effect, for better or for worse, said we're freezing nuclear development, and from here on out, not only are we going to attempt to prohibit new countries from acquiring nuclear weapons, we're going to attempt to get the existing nuclear powers to reduce them and ultimately eliminate. On the other hand, I have a problem, I don't know about you, about assassinating scientists. That's murder, folks. That's murder. And I don't know who's doing it, but I think we all have our suspicions. And I think it's a terrible mistake, because you're inviting retaliation. That's all we need, right? Some poor guy riding his bike over to MIT, gets wiped out by, this is scary stuff, George. So, no, I think these non-nuclear powers ought to be part of the international agreement. They ought to open themselves to inspection. After all, they're signatories, They sign these treaties, and then they won't abide by them. But at the same time, I think we ourselves have a major responsibility here, and at least in terms of this latest stuff with these assassinations, I'm not sure that we're doing what we ought to be doing.
One other question will go to the floor. The T.R. Reid, the great Washington Post journalist, did a book on comprehensive health care around the world. And it's probably, in my judgment, the best single book done. A lot of other people agree. And when you look at the World Health Organization listing of the best medical care plans in the world, France is number 1, the United States is 35. And the parenthetical is that the British system was introduced by a conservative prime minister by the name of Winston Churchill.
I'm not sure that's right.
Well, that's true.
It was introduced.
Well, it was the Labour government, but Churchill was a strong supporter of it.
The Labour government introduced.
They did. But again, the interesting thing, George, about the American healthcare system is that we have pieces of all of these other systems. Our British National Health Service is the VA. Government run, government financed, docs, nurses, everybody are government employees, and it's quite good. It's gotten very good in the last 8, 10, 12 years, and doing some of the most innovative stuff in the business. Our Canadian plan is Medicare for those who are 65 and older. That's what they have. And then we have bits and pieces of all kinds of other stuff. The problem is it's all bits and pieces with huge gaps. And that's what we ought to be trying to deal with. But even Margaret Thatcher couldn't eliminate the National Health Service. She tried, and she got killed politically. It's very popular in the UK. And they do have an option of buying supplemental private coverage, which is fine. We do, as you know, if you're on Medicare. But I can't forget, George, a story that John Breaux used to tell, senator from Louisiana, remember Breaux? Who, when Clinton proposed his plan, decided he'd have a series of town meetings in Louisiana. He was in southwest Louisiana talking about this thing, and a woman got up and there was smoke coming out of her ears. I mean, she was furious. She said to him, "John, you go back to Washington and tell those people to keep the government's hands off my Medicare." Well, that's a communication problem, folks, you know? No, I'm serious. And if people don't understand that, there was a story in the New York Times yesterday about a woman in South Carolina who says the government's doing too much, we've got to cut the federal budget in half. She's voting for, I don't know who she's voting for. She's obviously no liberal. She's on SSI disability, which means she automatically gets Medicare. That's a communication problem. She doesn't understand that. Then we've failed. We've failed.
Every southern state, with the exception of Texas, is a welfare-dependent state, meaning they receive more from the federal government that they give in return. Robin Siegel.
My question really follows up on what you were just saying, which is, why are so many of the supporters of the Republican candidates voting against their own interests? Because they are the ones who don't have the health care, or they have benefits. So why is it?
Because we have done a lousy job of helping them to understand what this is. And I don't say that in a kind of sense of noblesse oblige. Look, one of the things you got to do in politics is communicate effectively. Sometimes I was able to do that fairly successfully, sometimes I wasn't. I obviously wasn't in 1988, or didn't. But when one of the top items on the Democratic agenda, at least, is this, and you got a president of Congress working like crazy, taking a lot of heat on the subject, you got to have a message, folks. You got to have a message. And it's got to be short, and it's got to connect with people. And in my view, the message should have been from the beginning, we're not going to rest until working people and their families have decent and affordable health care in the United States. Over and over and over again. Not because people are simple-minded, but because life's complicated. And there are other people trying to knock it down. That should have been the message from the beginning. Has it been? I don't hear it from the White House. I certainly don't hear it from the congressional Democrats. I don't understand this. And to repeat, I'm not going to poll you to death, but the polls, I've seen the numbers. 95% of the American people believe that working people and their families ought to get decent, affordable health care. If that's the case, and that's what we're trying to do, why aren't we saying that? Well, I picked up the phone not too long ago. I don't do this very often. I called somebody in the White House who's involved with communications. And I said to her, Stephanie, look, this is all about working people and their families. Trust me. And we're not saying that. It's not about insurance reform and pre-existing conditions and all this jazz. She said, well, you see, most people have it, and we got to tell them what's in it for them. I said, it's not working. What do I know? I'll keep trying. But I think the Democrats, in this case, have just done a lousy job of helping people understand what's at stake here and what we're trying to do. And as a result, not only are we getting picked apart in a political sense, but folks don't understand this. Well, okay, so a couple of million kids are staying on their family policy until they're 26. That's good, but that's not the central issue here. This is about working folks. And by the way, if you also look at the polls, working folks in this country, especially white working folks, are voting Republican. Why? Because Democrats aren't talking to them. Especially when it comes to health care, right? No wonder they're voting Republican. So I just think this is a colossal political and communication failure on our part, and we ought to do something about it.